Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the wonderful welcome. Thank you, Governor, Lieutenant Governor Sullivan, Senator Klobuchar. I'm surprised she's here tonight because Senator Franken said that she no longer goes to places where everybody's already for her. He says she goes to places where she has even one vote under 70% and then washes windows until she closes the threshold. That's what you want. And I thank you for sending her to the Senate, and I know we can depend on you to send her back. And I've got a special word of thanks to Al, I'll say in a moment. I thank the members of Congress who are here, Betty McCollum, Tim Walz, Keith Ellison. I think I ought to congratulate Keith Ellison for joining Hillary's aide, Huma Abedin, both Muslim Americans, in being attacked by the right wingers. Congratulations. Thank you. I want to thank my great friend and former ambassador to Japan, Vice President Mondale, and Joan for being here tonight and for all they have done. And we had a wonderful time at the dedication of the statue to Hubert Humphrey today. It was something that I will never forget. And so thank you, Fritz Mondale, for all you've done for Minnesota, for America, and for being my friend for Lord only knows how long now. Secretary of State Ritchie, thank you. County Attorney Freeman and Mayor Ryback, I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And I want to say a special word of thanks to Mark Dayton, who was a great colleague of Hillary's in the Senate, then actually ran for governor of Minnesota knowing he was going to face all these no-win problems because of what had happened to the economy. And I think has tried to find solutions and fight for them that would bring us together instead of divide us and enable this state to continue to be a model for the nation, proving that cooperation and shared responsibility and shared prosperity works a heck of a lot better than constant conflict and winner-take-all politics. So thank you, Mark Dayton. Well, I've had an interesting day today. I already did the event for Vice President Humphrey, and I did a couple of other political events, and when I leave you, I have to go. The reason I originally said I'd come to Minneapolis tonight was to go to the annual fundraiser for the Starkey Foundation because they're one of my partners around the world. You should be proud of this. They will give free hearing aids to more than 130,000 children around the world this year. And you should be really proud of that. And we do an enormous amount of work together. They support me, and all they ever ask me to do is show up here. And I love to come to Minnesota in the summer. I don't mind it in the winter, but I have, for a reason, you laugh, but I'll tell you the reason why. When our daughter was 5 years old, she said, I want to go to camp. I want to have adventures. I swear, literally, I want to have adventures. I want to learn things. I want to have fun. Most of your kids are older than 5 when they want to leave home, you know. And so we sent her first for 2 years to the 1-week camp at the Concordia Language Villages in northern Minnesota. And for 8 years, She went to camp there every summer, and Hillary and I would take her and go get her. And we got to know a little bit about the Lakes country, and I love those Concordia language camps, and I'm convinced it's the best way to learn a language. I'll never forget it. It was a great gift to our family, so I want to thank everybody in Minnesota for that. Last week, President Obama called me, and I was hoping, it's warm, I was hoping he's going to invite me to play golf. And instead, I lost my golf game when I started working in Haiti because I didn't quite quit doing anything else. And instead of that, he took another month of my life away by asking me to nominate him for president at our convention in Charlotte. And I was profoundly honored, but humbled by it, and I have given a lot of thought to this. When we got our brains beat out in 2010, just 4 years after winning the Congress and 2 years after his historic victory for president, I did 133 appearances. I knew what was coming and I didn't want it on my conscience, so I said, I'll just stand there and get rolled like everybody else. It was one of 3 truly epic setbacks we've had just in the last 32 years, the 1980 election, the 1994 congressional elections, and the 2010 elections. And in thinking about what I should say tonight and for the rest of the campaign, one of the things that struck me as ironic is that this Tea Party Congress is now down to 17% approval. And you may find this hard to believe, but I actually feel bad for them. And here's why. They must be so confused because all they have done is exactly what they told you they were going to do, which reveals 2 challenging aspects of our political system. One is the electorate that shows up in midterm elections is different from the electorate that shows up in presidential years. It's older, less diverse, higher income, and more ideological. In other words, too many voters look like me. 2 is, in campaigns, we pay a lot of attention to the positioning of campaigns and the rhetorical slogans and what they say about their opponents, and not enough to the details about what they say. Now, the Congress that the American people elected and now profess to deplore told them exactly what they were going to do, but nobody paid any attention. And now the same people are saying we should defeat President Obama because he said if he didn't turn us around in 4 years, we could get rid of him. But he didn't have 4 years, he just had 2 years. I told somebody, you have to be of a certain age to remember Harry Houdini, the famous magician, but Houdini lost his life because he went one trick too far. He had himself deposited in a water tank upside down in a straitjacket with his hands wrapped behind his back. And it seems to me that the attack of the Republicans on the president is, we put you in the water tank upside down in a straitjacket with your hands tied behind your back, and since you failed to escape and restore the economy, you're out of here. So here's what I want to say about that. These are the things I think you should know. First of all, let's take a little walk down memory lane. Since 1961, since we were celebrating Hubert Humphrey today, the election that brought President Kennedy and Vice President Johnson to power, and then after President Kennedy's assassination, President Johnson to the White House in 1964, with then Senator Humphrey helping to pass the Civil Rights Bill in the United States Senate. Since 1961, in those 51 years, the Republicans have had the White House for 28 years. The Democrats have had the White House for 23 years. The private economy has produced 66 million jobs in those 51 years. 24 million in the Republican 28 years, and 42 million in the Democratic 23 years. So, I say that to make this point. You have to tell your fellow Minnesotans this. A lot of people say, oh, I'm independent because I hate the parties. They're all frozen in time. They never change. And all you need is the right person on a white horse to come in and do the right things and just bend everybody else to their will. Ideas have consequences. Policies have consequences. They change lives. They create possibilities or foreclose them. We have got to stop acting as if we are not connected to the past or the future, and it's just a personality contest. One of the things that bothers me about all this technology, and I love it. Hillary's in Africa, and I couldn't even get to her if I couldn't text half the time. So I've had to learn to become more techno-literate. There's a lot of good things about it. But this constant, communication and the average teenager sending 84 text messages a day and people taking so many pictures of wherever they are that they're not really with the people they're with. The only important thing is, do you get the picture, not do you relate? There is a risk in all this of ignoring the big obvious things in face of a bunch of details that will then vanish into the wind. This is important. We believe, we Democrats, that the world works better when prosperity is shared, when responsibilities are shared, when we are expanding the boundaries of our community so that everybody who works hard and plays by the rules has a chance to live the American dream. The world works better. The world works better when we have honest disagreements, because nobody is right all the time, and even a broken clock is right twice a day. And all of us poor mortals, we are condemned to spend our entire existence between those extremes. Nearly all of us are going to be right more than twice a day, and none of us are going to be right all the time. But if you go back and read the debates of the Constitutional Convention and the ferocious arguments that were held, not all of which were resolved by the time the Constitution was presented for ratification, where there were still differences of opinion about what it means. So I think it's really interesting that there are people on the Supreme Court and elsewhere, Glenn Beck, for example, who say they know exactly what the intent of the framers were when the framers themselves were unsure on some of these points. But their differences were good. Why? Because they entered into argument for the purpose of making an agreement. Because they said, our diversity of opinion and experience and knowledge only matters if we come to an agreement and chart a course together to make something happen. And one of the things they made happen was to give us a government that was supposed to be limited enough so that it did not engage in the kind of arbitrary abuse of power and extinguishment of individual liberty that they had fled, but strong and flexible enough to meet the challenges of each new era. Fast forward to the 21st century, there's not a single example on planet Earth, not one, of a successful economy that does not have both a powerful private sector and an effective government that work together and foster the broad interests of the people of the country they represent. Now, so what's that got to do with the current election? Let's begin in 2008. In 2008, before the financial meltdown, don't forget, it's been so bad, people forget this. The economy was already so bad that the median family income after inflation before the meltdown was $2,000 lower than it was the day I left office, but healthcare costs had tripled and college costs had doubled. There had been almost no new jobs, and all the growth was in housing and finance and consumer spending, leading us to maxed out credit cards and all the other things you know. So in 2006, the Democrats had won the Congress with a mandate to try to do something about that, as well as the decision by the previous administration to cut taxes 5 times, pay for 2 wars on borrowed money, pay for a senior drug benefit on borrowed money, and pay for President Bush's finest achievement, PEPFAR, to help fight AIDS, TB, and malaria around the world on borrowed money. So I could have a tax cut. I love saying that. I never had a nickel to my name until I left the White House. Who knew I would become the favorite object of Republican adoration to take another tax cut? How you feeling, boy? Here's a little more money. You'll do well. Take it. Okay, so then we have this presidential election. And even in 2007, when it began, anybody that was paying attention knew then that the odds were overwhelming that whoever the Democratic Party nominated would be elected president, assuming there were no cattle rustlers in there or anything like that. So we had this vigorous primary, and Senator Obama was nominated. He offered us a very broad, sweeping, but rather specific plan to modernize the economy in a way that would generate more jobs, make prosperity more broadly shared, deal with the economic challenges as well as the environmental challenges of climate change, make us more energy independent, help us to deal with the fact that we were paying too much for health care and getting too little, make college more affordable again, get us out of Iraq, and have a national security plan based on a world with more partners and fewer adversaries. And he ran on that. In 2007, we started having a serious economic problem because of the failure of home mortgages. But nothing he said was undermined by circumstances. They reinforced the program that he embraced. But then in 2008, the wheels ran off. Just 2 months before the election, less than 2 months, September 15, 2008, when Lehman Brothers failed and was not rescued after Bear Stearns failed, an investment bank, and AIG, an insurance company, and several purely commercial banks, because of their mortgage, had failed, then the whole system began to unravel. And so when he took office in January of 2009, then President Obama faced an interesting dilemma. First, he had to stop a full-scale depression from occurring. He and John McCain, to both of their credit, cast unpopular votes right before the presidential election to save the financial system. And to President Bush's credit, who didn't want to do it either, they paid the first installment. So, first thing President Obama did was to go back and take the extra action that was necessary. A lot of people don't remember this, but before that first TARP bill passed, the biggest car dealer in America had gone 4 days without being able to finance a new car. It was about to get to the point where you couldn't go to Sears and buy a refrigerator on an installment plan. So he did that. And then he asked the Congress to pass a bill now known as Dodd-Frank to try to reduce the chances that anything like this financial collapse could happen again by dealing with the central cause of it, which was excess leverage. That is, both commercial banks in mortgages and investment banks were able to put too much money at risk with too little capital to back it up. For all you hear about all this Dodd-Frank business and all the complexities of it, that is the core, the heart. Every place in the world there was a financial collapse, it was caused by excessive risk backed up by too little capital. So he did that. And then he set about doing things that were consistent with what he pledged to us for 2 years he would do, which would help us get out of the ditch we were in, but also help achieve the objectives he had talked about from the beginning. He restructured the automobile industry. It was not a bailout. It was not a bailout, it was a restructuring. He said, if management will give something and labor will give something and the creditors will give something, I will put some money in here because no banks were going to loan money unless the federal government put money in. And we were facing the loss of more than 1 million jobs in producing auto parts and dealerships around the country. And an enormous blow to our image as a manufacturing country, not being able to support our own car companies anymore. So instead of failing and losing 1 million jobs, there are now 200,000 more people working to manufacture cars in America today than there were before that bill passed. And yet more evidence that cooperation works better than constant conflict. The Auto Workers Union and the other affected unions, the management of the car companies, all the environmental groups, and the United States government reached an agreement about how to stage in a dramatic increase in the mileage standards for American cars in a way that not only had the support of everyone, but by common consensus will create another 150,000 high-wage jobs from the new technologies necessary to meet these standards. And then, in the so-called and much derided stimulus bill, there were tax incentives to bring manufacturing back and to move more quickly into a clean energy economy based on solar and wind and geothermal and environmentally appropriate traditional energy like natural gas and more efficiency. And notwithstanding all the opposition of the Republicans, every single scientific analysis of the United States potential says that we rank first or second in the world in the ability to generate electricity from the sun and the wind. And our biggest problem is that with the exception of the cities in the West, the sun shines brightest and the wind blows hardest where the people are not. So it's true. George Bush's energy department, not mine or President Obama's, said that enough wind blows in North Dakota to electrify 25% of America. That enough wind blows to the North Dakota border with Canada to the West Texas border with Mexico to electrify America many times over. But the problem is the generating transmission capacity is not there. So there was money in that bill to help build the modern transmission grid too. And other things to bring manufacturing back. So for the first time in years, we started gaining manufacturing jobs again. And guess what? It wasn't just a government giveaway. After we did all this, and this is one reason some of those loans went, Brad, the Chinese came back in and their government gave $32 billion more in subsidies, but we were still investing more than they were because the private sector was so impressed by what the government had done, they put in over $200 billion in the last couple of years to create new manufacturing jobs in America for a clean energy future, an independent energy future, one that fights climate change, one that brings back manufacturing, one that keeps us on the cutting edge of innovation. And then, while all this is going on, the Congress and the President dealt with the troubling economic statistic. We had fallen from 1st to 14th in the world in the percentage of our young people with four-year college degrees. We were still near the top in the percentage of young people going, but they were quitting like crazy, either because the economy was in such bad shape they had to help their families, or the cost had gone up so much they thought they'd never be able to pay off their student loans. So they passed a historic reform bill, and the reason all this to-do has been going back and forth about, the recent disputes about the interest rates of the student loan is that this bill cannot be made fully effective until 2014, but here's what it does. It says the government will set aside a loan reserve, make the loans to colleges direct, that cuts the cost, and every single recipient of a student loan will have the option of paying that loan back for up to 20 years at a small fixed percentage of their income, so nobody will ever have to drop out of college again because of the burden of their loans. This is a huge advance. And then, most provocatively and at great cost, the President supported those in the Congress and in the country who wanted to have comprehensive health care reform. And most people in Minnesota got it because you're already at a very high percentage of your people with insurance. But we heard, all this stuff about socialized medicine. The Republicans even had the gall to say we were cutting Medicare. I'll say more about that in a minute. But they screamed and squalled. They said, we're interfering with people's personal liberty with this individual mandate. When I was president, they wanted an individual mandate. And the reason I wasn't ready for it in 1993 is I was afraid that too many employers would stop insuring people. But because we didn't do anything since 1993 and 94, too many employers have stopped insuring people anyway. So it was the right thing to do. The Republicans had always said they liked the individual mandate. It was a personal responsibility thing. Now they say we are trampling on liberties, that every American has a constitutional right to get sick or be in an accident and expect everybody else to pay for it. That's their position. The president knew it was controversial. He had originally opposed it. But when he looked at the facts, he bravely reached the same conclusion everybody else does. There's no point in trying to reform health care unless everybody can get it on affordable terms. Because we all might get cancer, or someone in our family could get a terrible disease, or somebody in our family could be in a terrible accident. And the whole purpose of this is to protect families from being wrecked and have a universal system that we can afford. So he supported that. And there were many other things in that bill. So, in the immortal words of Governor Palin, how's that hopey-changey healthcare thing working out for you? I would like to tell you how it's working out for you. And this is what you need to be telling people in Minnesota and throughout the country. Number one, for the last 2 years since that bill passed, inflation and healthcare costs have been 4% or less. That's the lowest rate in 50 years. Now, why is that important? Why is that important? Because we spend 17.8% of our income on health care. No other large country spends more than 11.8%, that's France. The difference is $1 trillion a year. That's how much we'd save if we devoted the same percent of our income to the next most expensive country does. Governor Romney was just in Israel bragging on Israel's healthcare system. High quality, low cost. It's even cheaper than France. Why? Well, they got an individual mandate and a government budget. They got the things that he hates. They want the status quo. The status quo in 2009, before anybody could blame Obamacare for anything, insurance company profits went up over 30% when the rest of the economy was facing bankruptcy. What happened? The prices rose so much that employers dropped 5 million people from coverage, and 3.5 million of them wound up on state Medicaid rolls, which increased state government budget pressures and the federal deficit. The program they profess to hate, they have done more to expand than anybody on earth. They have helped make Medicare great because they have helped make insurance unaffordable. You got to ask people who say there's something wrong with this health care bill if they really preferred the old status quo. Before this bill passed, medical costs were responsible for 2/3 of personal bankruptcies in America. 2/3. Before this bill passed, there's a reason per capita income was lower than it was the day I left office. Nobody ever got a raise. One big reason people didn't get a raise in the previous decade is that their employers who would have given them money for a raise spent it on their health care policies instead. The worst thing that we could have done is to stay with the status quo. It was bankrupting America, it was cruel, and it was unfair. So, you need to make sure everybody you know who tells you how terrible this is knows this. Number one, 4% inflation for 2 years, the first time in 50 years. Number two, over $1 billion have already been paid this year in insurance premium refunds to small businesses and to individuals, thanks to Al Franken's amendment that every insurance company has to spend between 80 and 85% of your premium money on your health care, not on profits or promotion. Unless you think that's too draconian, Minnesota's at about 90% now. Now, I've got a friend who runs one of the big Blue Cross networks who's silently cheering this. He said, I'm at 87. He said, it's scandalous that anybody couldn't do this for 85%. And that shouldn't be ignored. That's $1 billion in people's profits they wouldn't have. And that does not include the refunds from California. They're not in yet. And it does not include the number of insurance companies that have already lowered their rates so they wouldn't pay the refund. Aetna, one of our biggest and best insurance companies, filed a year ago a petition in the state of Connecticut to lower their insurance premiums so they could be at the right ratio. Thank you, Senator Franken, and thank you, America. Millions of young people between the ages of 21 and 26 are now covered for the first time on their family's insurance policy. Tens of millions of people, most of them older people, are now eligible for preventive tests and screenings without copays. And Medicare has closed the donut hole in the drug program and added a few years to its life expectancy. And this is what the Republicans call cutting Medicare. And it really is the way they thought. Here's what they cut. They cut the guaranteed profit to the providers of the Medicare Advantage program. You know what Medicare Advantage is? It's an interesting idea. It says if you contract with a private insurance company, you will get preventive benefits as well as traditional Medicare. Sounds nice, right? An independent study said that after it passed, the first providers gave $600 worth of preventive benefits and got $1,150 of tax money to do it. And I don't know about you, but I'd do just about anything that wasn't illegal or immoral for 100% markup. All Congress did was to cut the profit margin, put the savings into closing the donut hole and extending the life of the Medicare Trust Fund. The Republicans attacked them in 2011, saying they were cutting Medicare. They were cutting corporate subsidies. That's what they were cutting. And guess what? There's a happy ending to this story. In 2011, a record number of private insurance companies applied to the federal government to run the Medicare Advantage program because they realized that now that we were getting out of stratospheric profits to reasonable margins, they could go for high volume and get more people to take it because they weren't being overcharged. And the government finally had done something that made good health care sense and good economic sense. That is the real record of health care reform in the last 2 years, and you ought to make sure that every single solitary person in America knows it. Remember that. And where are we on the economy? Here we are in 2012. In 2010, the American people gave the House to the Tea Party and elected a lot more of their sympathizers in the Senate. And they had a very different view of what economic and government policy should be. First of all, they favor austerity now, just like the EU and the United Kingdom. Did you ever think the Republicans would be advocating the economic policy of old Europe? They spent a lifetime, a generation, bashing old Europe, and here they are saying they were right on the economy all along. Old Europe, the Eurozone's unemployment rate's 11.2%. If you like that better than what the 163,000 jobs you got today, by all means, give them the White House and the Congress. Their policy is austerity now, weaken financial regulations, cut taxes on upper income people, increase the defense budget even more than the Pentagon wants, and in ways they do not want, increase the debt of the country over the long run, and that'll be better for you. In other words, go back to what got us in trouble in the first place. Now, let's see how President Obama's doing. He always says that he's disappointed we're not back to full employment. I don't have a dog in this hunt. I wasn't there. I just studied the economy, and I spent a lot of time on it. The wound we suffered was too deep to fully heal in 4 years. That's the truth. In 500 years, no one has ever done it. No country suffering a wound this deep has been able to return to full employment in 4 years. Now that's the truth. And in the last 2 years, they've had the skids on. So let's look at the score between the position that his opponent advocates and President Obama's record. The crushing job losses continued that started on September the 15th, 2008, continued throughout most of 2009. And the changes that President Obama adopted that were designed to create jobs didn't take full effect till the beginning of 2010. So if you look at the 30 months from the beginning of 2010 until today, a little more than that, you got essentially 4.5 million jobs, or about 150,000 jobs a month. Now, the Republicans say that's not enough to get back to full employment. That much is accurate. They say, so throw him out and put us in. And we'll go back to weaker financial regulation, more tax cuts on upper income people, and blowing the living daylights out of the debt over the long run, all the time decrying the deficit. We'll privatize Medicare if we get a chance, and gut the federal budget in many areas, but that's what we want to do, what we've always done. So let's look at this. In the 7 years and 8 months of the previous administration before the meltdown, okay? Before the meltdown, there were 2.6 million jobs created. So President Obama's record for 4.5 million jobs in 2.5 years is more than 40% better than the 2.6 million jobs in 7 years and 8 months. So what he's really saying is, What President Obama's opponent and the whole Republican Party is saying, we should have more than 150,000 jobs a month. So please, throw him out and let us adopt our policy, which produces less than 30,000 jobs a month. And you need to tell people what actually happened. We have a scorecard here. You're not guessing. And the only way you can possibly miss this, anybody could, is if either they don't know or they're just so bound to the ideology, they don't care what the evidence is. If you love your country, if you want the American dream to be alive and well, you have to answer the first great question of this election. Who is more likely to bring us back to full employment more quickly? The answer is the president and the Democrats in Congress who are trying to get growth going now and have long-term debt reduction after that. That's what we should do. As nearly as I can tell, their policy is austerity now and long-term increase in the debt. Every objective, nonpartisan analysis of all the budgets presented by the president's opponent and the Republican leaders in Congress has said that they will all increase the national debt over the next decade somewhere between $1 and $5 trillion. He has already put forward to them a plan they rejected that would reduce the debt over the same period of time by $3 trillion. So you want to invest and grow and innovate now and reduce the debt when we have growth? Or do you want to have austerity now and increase the debt when we have growth and run the interest rates through the roof and drive the country into the ditch? This is a simple choice. This is not rocket science. This is not about ideology. This is about evidence. It's about what works, what will produce broadly shared prosperity. So, you got to talk to people like this. People come up to me after every time I say something, they say, why don't I know this? And I say, I don't know, I'm 65, my wife has a traveling job, I have a lot of time to read. What can I tell you? Before I quit, there's a second question we talked about today at Hubert Humphrey's dedication. It's what kind of country do you want to live in? Do you believe in our motto, e pluribus unum, out of many one? Do you believe that the founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor to form a more perfect union? Is that still our goal? You know what to form a more perfect union, which was 18th century English when they said it, you know what it means in 21st century common talk? It is, we are not perfect now, we will never be perfect, but we can always do better. They left us a government strong enough and flexible enough to meet the challenges of each new era with enough restraints to keep us from being stupid enough to think we were so smart we could crush other people's liberties who disagree with us. That's what it means. And we've got to decide whether we believe in that. So which party really believes in a pluribus unum? Which party believes in shared prosperity, in shared responsibility? I think you need to think about these constitutional amendments in Minnesota. They tell you which party believes that we should share the future and all be part of our union. I think you need to think about these voter suppression laws all over the country. It gives me the chills. Look, I'm a Southerner. I can still remember the poll tax. I remember the poll tax. Poll tax was used for two things in the South, depending on the span of control of the people who employed African Americans. They were either used to keep black people from voting, or they'd buy these poll taxes by the rolls and tell people if they wanted to keep their jobs, they better vote the way they were told. And there was no such thing as a secret ballot. I remember. And nothing like this has happened in my lifetime since then. In Pennsylvania the other day, a swing state, in a law court in Pennsylvania where their voter restrictions are being sued on by the Democrats, The Republican Attorney General stipulated, that's a legal word for agreed, that there was not a shred of evidence of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and that if their law were stricken, there probably would be none. And unfortunately for them, the House Republican leader in Pennsylvania said, while the case was going on, he said, we passed that law so Governor Romney could beat President Obama here. That was sort of embarrassing. I mean, usually they just stand up here and piously assert that they're trying to fight voter fraud. Same thing happened in Montana, where they were trying to get rid of same-day registration, and the sponsor said, well, we can beat Obama here, but I don't know about Tester. Tester won by 4 points, Senator Tester, in the last election. 2 points, only 2 points. But of the people voting on same-day registration, he won by 4. So if we get rid of it, the kids will stay home, we'll beat Tester. Inconvenient for the voter fraud argument. I love the High Plains. Nobody's taught them to lie with a straight face yet. You got to give that guy credit. He stood up there and just told it like it was. We're laughing, but this is a serious deal. You cheered Keith Ellison. But it's a serious deal when people go after patriotic Americans because somebody somewhere who professes the same faith that they do did something deplorable. It's a serious deal when we think the path to the future is winner take all instead of we're all in this together. It's a serious deal because our youth and diversity are our meal ticket to the future. The United States is going to do fine when we get out of this mess. Because in part we're younger than Europe, we're younger than China. Not yet, in 20 years we'll be younger than China. We're younger than Japan. Because of our diversity. Look at this crowd. This is a lot different crowd than we'd had 30 years ago here. There are all these Catholic churches all over my native state of Arkansas that have to have Sunday Mass in Spanish now. Like you, we have a lot of people from Southeast Asia, Hmong, Laos, and others. So I leave you with this. You got to decide. Somebody asks you why you're a Democrat, say because President Obama and the Congress are more likely to bring us back to full employment and shared prosperity with their approach than going back to what got us in trouble in the first place, and give them the numbers, 4.5, 2.6. Give them the numbers. Since the Republicans won the Congress, their austerity budgets cost us 700,000 jobs already, and the police officers, the teachers, the nurses, the firefighters that would have been kept working, and unemployment would be under 8% today if they hadn't said no to the president on that. Tell them the numbers. And then say, but you also care what kind of country you live in. You want it to be a we're all in this together country. You want to be forming a more perfect union. You don't like constant conflict and winner take all. Remember what the guy who beat Senator Lugar in the Republican primary in Indiana said. He said, I won in part because he cooperated with the president on national security matters. It used to be thought the patriotic duty of every member of the Congress, in the Senate, and the House of Representatives, without regard to their party and without regard to the presidency parties, to cooperate on national security. This guy said it was a sign of weakness and lack of principle. He said our views are so irreconcilable that we have to keep fighting and force the American people to choose one or the other. That is not the American way. If that had been our view in the beginning, there would have been no Constitution, no Bill of Rights, and the United States would not be here after over 200 years. We are in this together, and we better start acting like it, and we better start voting for it. Minnesota knows this, and you can lead the way. Thank you, and God bless you all.